It was not a celebrated event. It was an Olympic trial, to be sure, and the trial of a sport of unusually passionate participants. But no tickets were sold, and the community in which it was held, Princeton, New Jersey, largely ignored it. The local innkeepers and restaurateurs did not report to the Chamber of Commerce, as seems mandatory these days, that holding the sculling finals in their city had brought $5 million worth of extra business to the town. A handful of hastily put up cardboard signs told the curious few how to find their way through Princeton streets to the shores of Lake Carnegie. In a world of media events, journalists were notably absent. There were no press credentials. There were no television cameras. There was only one still photographer on duty. One young woman from the U.S. Rowing Association was in charge of the press, and her typewriter, old and battered, immediately broke down. A reporter from the Boston Globe showed, and so did one from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Those papers probably represented the two most serious rowing cities in America. Harvard-Penn rivalries and crew were special. The New York Times sent a stringer. Crew was a shakier sport at Columbia. I did have this wonderful moment last Tuesday where I went on a bike ride from my sister's house in Cambridge. And as I was wandering back on the Boston side, I approached this like beautiful contemporary modern sort of like steel and iron and like wood, this like thing, and I was like, what is that? A little closer, it's the Harry Parker Boathouse. and then 5 minutes later, I pass the Newell Boathouse, which is where this book is set.
Yeah.
And as I made a left-hand turn to cross the bridge on the road that takes you straight into Harvard Square, riding up and over the bridge, 6 single scullers sort of come around the corner and are sort of like sculling towards me. And I was like, oh, I got it. I was like, I should really wait and get this picture, but I had a plane to catch.
Yeah.
And it was just like, it was this wonderful thing of being like, suddenly finding myself like in the center of the book.
Yeah.
And being like, holy shit, like that boathouse, the Harry Parker Boathouse, I know did not exist in 1983.
Yeah.
And like just seeing like, holy shit, that's like part of the legacy lives on 40 years later.
It's one of the things that's really great about this book is being kind of invited into this world of, it's largely kind of like an oral culture, the way that he describes it. And I mean, it's one of those things like anybody who's been to Boston, you grew up near Boston, I've visited Boston a lot, and you see people out rowing or sculling, and that's kind of part of the aesthetic of the city, particularly Cambridge, or, into Boston and the particulars of the Charles River. And there's other places like that, like Princeton. Yeah, when you start recognizing like names and things like that, it enriches your experience of being in a place like Boston. And Boston is so old and has so much history, and it's also kind of a small town that you're sort of like, like you could walk into that boathouse and say hi to people, and you might start chatting with someone training for the Olympics, and
this is a great example of the smallness of rowing. Like, I think I told somebody like years ago when I first discovered this book, I was like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing book. And they were like, oh yeah, well, like Tiff coaches like over there. Yeah. Like we could ride over there on our bikes right now and I could introduce you to him. I know him quite well. Yeah. And it's just like, what?
Yeah. That's super fun. I mean, for a long time, Joe Frazier ran a gym in Philadelphia that like anybody could like pay $50 a month and go work out there, and that and like he would just be there like working with boxers and stuff like that. I think we should say we're talking now. We have started talking about David Halberstam's The Amateurs. This was your selection, and what's the name of this series again? I don't.
This is Jock-Nerds Unite.
Jock-Nerds Unite. Well, crew rowing is a very jock-nerdy sport. The best practitioners traditionally have been Ivy Leaguers. Yeah, we should do a recap.
I mean, the book mostly revolves around one of my favorite, when I'm talking to people about this book, the thing that I usually say to them is like, it's not even about the 1984 Olympics.
Yeah.
Like, it is about the 1984 single scull Olympic trials, which were held in Princeton, New Jersey in early 1984. And the book is on the 4 favorites to be the single Olympic American contestant.
The single skull contestant.
Single skull. Yeah, exactly.
And
we get a profile of
Yep.
each in turn, and then we learn about the context of sculling and rowing in the U.S. in the 1980s. We get a profile of the Olympic team coach, Harry Parker, and we learn about his coach as well, and a lot of the history of the rowing programs at Harvard and Yale.
His coach named Nord or something like that.
Something like that. I can grab it while you give us the dramatis personae.
Sure. So those 4 and sculling, if you don't know, the difference between sculling and rowing is rowing you operate one oar, and sculling you operate both oars at the same time. And so generally a single scull, the only way you can row in a single is sculling, because you need to be operating 2 oars. I don't know if there are 4 or 6 or 8 boats for sculling
there are
and
doubles. There are doubles and quads.
Oh, doubles and quads. Okay.
The quad, I imagine to be an incredible technical challenge.
Yeah.
4 people double oar rowing at the same time.
Sounds amazing.
Seems, yeah. I think, and so, there's, just like in traditional rowing where there's a 4 and an 8, the sculling, there's a single, a double, and a quad.
Got it. And in rowing and sculling, where one of the things we learn is that the single scull is probably it has the most appeal for these guys, even though they might even be more successful in the Olympics in a double or quad or in an 8. But these guys, they're the most competitive, and they want to be in the single scull because they want to be acknowledged as the greatest sculler. And the only way you do that is if you row by yourself. And so the main contestants are Tiff, Christopher Wood. He's the favorite. He's 31 at the time. He missed the 1980s Olympics because Jimmy Carter boycotted them, and that was probably his best shot for an Olympic medal. But he's hung in, and this is not a sport where there's a lot of money for amateurs. So what that means is like living kind of like a college student, into your 30s. There's John Bigelow, who is he's not an Olympian, but he's a former champion who was injured and is recovering. I think he's about 25 or 26. He's younger than Tiff. He was a rower at Yale. There's Joe Buscarin, who was also a rower at Yale, 1 year older. He has been, up to this point, thought of as kind of a tier down from the other two. The other two are bigger and more powerful. But he's also considered the most technical rower of the 3. And so if he puts everything together correctly in a race and the other 2 make mistakes, he might be able to beat them. And we also learned that he's been rowing very well and has occasionally, like in practice runs, beaten Bigelow and Tiff. And then there's Brad Lewis, who we only meet in like chapter 11.
Chapter 11.
The dark horse. He's been training in California, and he's an outsider. So the first 3 I mentioned all know each other pretty well. They're kind of like rival friends. I think, John and Tiff are really good friends, even though they are rivals and want to beat each other. And Joe is also friendly with those 2. And they work out together and stuff like that. But Brad doesn't really know these. I mean, they know him sort of, but they're not friendly with him. He's not collegial the way the others are. We get a lot of, sort of observations about the 4 men's relationships to one another, their kind of sport philosophies, their personalities, their personal philosophies, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I love about this book is like the real world sort of offers David Halberstam up like kind of a perfect like movie like assemblage.
Yeah.
You've got like the favorite, but who's like a little old.
Yeah.
And then you've got like Bigelow, who is like super talented, but also like kind of a dick, like precocious, and coming back from an injury. You have Buscarin, who is like, like you said, he's
scrappy,
sort of the most
small.
technical of the 3.
Yeah.
Smaller. And if everything goes right, he can win.
Yeah.
And then, in chapter 11, because we read up to about half, we read through chapter 12 of this book, at the very last minute, Halberstam injects like, oh, there's a fourth contender in here,
Right.
and he's a bit of a dick.
Yeah.
And like,
And he also, though, I mean, I also have the sense that he might have a kind of more modern sensibility around athleticism and a more modern understanding. So he works out in the weight room, and they all do, but he takes it more seriously and is more willing to put muscle on, which I find intriguing. And
he, out of all of them, reminded me the most of our friend Mike G. Like I found myself thinking about Brad Lewis being like, oh my gosh, if we could get Mike to play Brad Lewis, I sort of feel like that would be a very perfect kind of matchup. Yeah.
East Coast elite rowers who, they all just want to be like long limbed and stuff. And they don't want to work out in the gym. It's kind of stupid. Yeah. I don't want to talk to those guys. I'm doing a piece right now. And besides, they're the enemy. I don't want to hang out with them afterwards. I want to kick their ass. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're all kind of dicks, though. I gotta say, like,
totally.
It's just some of them hide it better than others, and also all of them have admirable qualities as well. They're not sociopaths, right? Like, or at least as far as we know, they all are capable of. Well, we don't know Brad very well, but the first three are very competitive one another. There's this anecdote where I think it's like. John won't loan Tiff a boat, a shell. I might have it backwards, but one of them has purchased a shell and has an extra one, and one of them wants to borrow it for free, and the other one's like, no, you got to pay me $50, I think a week, to use it, which seems like a lot, even though they're expensive. They're $3,000 or $4,000, so you can kind of see it from both of their perspectives. But and they will also not let their friendship get in the way of like. Various preferences. At various times, they're asked for favors by their friends, and they, refuse them.
Yeah, there's a moment, and I can't remember if it's Bigelow is visiting Buscarin's family or Buscarin is visiting Bigelow's family.
I think the latter.
Like, if you were to make a movie about this, like one of the JBs would have to get renamed.
Yeah,
absolutely. But one of them is talking to the mother who is hosting them.
Yeah.
And sort of cops to wanting to win the single, and the mother is like, "That's my son's event."
Yeah,
and they're collegial and cutthroat.
It would be very nice to win.
Yeah,
yeah, and this sort of awkward silence settles upon them, which I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, right? But there's this, and I think to your point, Halberstam is very, very carefully. Curating his anecdotes to make something that is almost cinematic. I don't think you luck into that. I think it's a combination of recognition and also careful assemblage.
I kind of wanted to kick us off with a reading of the first page of the book.
Sure.
The prose of this book is
very interesting.
Yeah, I would call it strong and understated.
Yep.
And so. There aren't a lot of passages that jump out at me as particularly like kaboom. And so when I was looking for a reading, I eventually, went back and read page one and was like, oh, this is great.
I think page one is incredibly important. Page one is almost always important, but I think page one is, to me, like it's the beginning of the argument, and it's the beginning of the case for why this matters, why this story matters.
I'm interested about your question about expectations, and I thought this might set that up, but I don't know. So we'll see where that comes from. So, chapter 1. It was not a celebrated event. It was an Olympic trial, to be sure, and the trial of a sport of unusually passionate participants. But no tickets were sold, and the community in which it was held, Princeton, New Jersey, largely ignored it. The local innkeepers and restaurateurs did not report to the Chamber of Commerce, as seems mandatory these days, that holding the sculling finals in their city had brought $5 million worth of extra business to the town. A handful of hastily put up cardboard signs told the curious few how to find their way through Princeton streets to the shores of Lake Carnegie. In a world of media events, journalists were notably absent. There were no press credentials. There were no television cameras. There was only one still photographer on duty. One young woman from the U.S. Rowing Association was in charge of the press, and her typewriter, old and battered, immediately broke down. A reporter from the Boston Globe showed, and so did one from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Those papers probably represented the two most serious rowing cities in America. Harvard-Penn rivalries and Crew were special. The New York Times sent a stringer. Crew was a shakier sport at Columbia. The regional Associated Press bureaus seemed to be competing for the right not to cover it. The scullers of America existed, it was clear, in a world of their own.
It's great. You start your book by being like, this doesn't matter to anybody.
It's great. It's so awesome.
The other thing is just a time capsule is I love how he's like, hardly anybody paid attention to it. Only the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Boston Globe, and the New York Times sent a stringer, which would be massive coverage in today's world of, emaciated newspapers. But this was a different era when, there just were way more reporters and journalists in the world. There's just a lot more coverage, period, happening. We're in a world of diminished attention, at least this kind of attention. There'd probably be a couple of like YouTubers or Instagram, influencers at this particular event, perhaps, or probably everybody would just be documenting it themselves nowadays. I bet that's what happens.
Yeah, the busy whir of drones would be everywhere.
Maybe so. Yeah, maybe so.
And I love, there's just little moments in here where like the editorial shows through for a brief moment. The local innkeepers and restaurateurs did not report to the Chamber of Commerce as seems mandatory these days.
Yeah.
There's a real, this is a book that's called The Amateurs. This is a book about sport, not really for sport's sake. Yes, sport for sport's sake, but also sport for ego's sake, sport for tradition's sake, that kind of thing. So much of this first page is about the lack of money, the lack of prestige, that kind of thing.
Did you happen to take note of how many pages in it took before we got a line of dialogue?
I did not. That is a great
I
question.
think
Do we even get any dialogue in the first chapter?
I don't think so. No, page 16.
Yep.
4 years ago, he had been asked by his Yale friend and teammate Steve Kiesling on why he was working so hard in the preparation for the 1980 Olympics, and had answered, "The Olympian stands alone." But I think it's chapter 1. Now, chapter 1 on my edition starts on page 9, so we're actually 7 pages in before we get a line of dialogue. But it does sort of feel like if Ernest Hemingway was writing nonfiction. That's what the prose seems like to me. And it even starts, this very first page is doing it, we're kind of at drone height over everything, or maybe a little bit lower than a helicopter. We're a bit detached. There are moments where we're sort of in the car with Buscar and Bigelow, but not really. We know what they talk about. We don't hear what they said to one another. We get one quote. It's not a very intimate portrait, even though, or at least the voice of the writer feels standoffish at the beginning. But very, very, I think it does become kind of an intimate portrait in a sense because of the suggestive quality of the anecdotes that are being assembled.
Yeah, in the world of, this is not gonzo journalism.
Not at all.
I guessed to you, we were talking earlier, that the reporter from the Boston Globe could very well be David Halberstam.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
But he does not insert himself in the way that maybe a Hunter S. Thompson or a Joan Didion, who, two of the other kind of big, lions of the era, might be doing. It is very detached, his sort of authorial voice.
Yep. I don't think he ever worked for the Globe. I just did a quick check too. So he's not even doing a kind of like Hitchcock cameo of sort of like,
totally.
And then somebody noticed a piece of paper on the ground and picked it up and handed it to the judge, or there's not even that up to this point. I don't think there's at any point a moment where he says, Bouskarin told me. I don't think we're ever given to understand which of these events Halberstam is present for and which of these events he is getting secondhand through interviews. We don't know who he interviews and who he doesn't interview. We gather that he interviews the four principals and Parker, the Olympics coach, and maybe some others as well. Maybe I think we kind of gather that he interviews the four principals' parents, because we hear the parents' opinion and some of their friends, because we get friends' descriptions of Tifwood and John Bigelow, but only a little bit. And usually it's just like one quote or one observation or something like that. My question about expectations, and I'm going to have more to say about the first page, I think, later. But I am curious. Now, you've already read this book, but if you can think back to a time where you hadn't, what are your expectations as of chapter 12 for actually who is going to be the Olympic nominee, based on what you've been given by the writer up to this point?
Yeah, what's great is I read this for the first time long enough ago that I don't actually remember who wins, which is good. That fits in really nicely with your question. I think
there might be a spoiler in the photos. Unfortunately, I saw something that suggested a spoiler, and I was like, nah, don't look. So I now have a theory based on that, which sucks, because I'd rather have the joy of predicting based on my own biases and thoughts about these athletes. But based on these athletes, who do you expect to win?
I think we're sort of being cued for Wood not to win. Is sort of they're like, it's one of those interesting things. I mean, like when you were just talking about basically perspective, it is very odd for a piece of nonfiction to appear in a kind of third person omniscient. Yeah, which is what this feels like. Yeah, and sure,
I think it was more common in this era. I think this was a more common nonfiction voice in the 70s and 80s. Tracy Kidder, sort of writes this way too. I imagine a lot of sports journalists and Halberstam is sometimes a sports journalist. I don't know. How did Roger Angell write?
A little bit more
personal. Yeah, a little
more personal.
Yeah.
Like you would very often get something like, like when I went through the turnstiles at Fenway, you get something like that, but what I think is interesting about this is like, it has the trappings of like sport movie arc, but it's nonfiction. And so it's really interesting to think about the expectations of it. I feel that we're being cued that Tifwood is not going to win. Yeah. That, especially because we get little snippets in the first chapter, things like, the rowing society felt that it would be a very nice thing if Tifwood were to win. Yeah. That kind of thing. And I feel, what we're being set up for is that Bigelow gets it. Yeah. Out of the four of them, he seems to be the one who is sort of approaching his peak at the right time. Like you said, Bouskarin, everything has to go correctly. And, Lewis, for all of his wonderful sort of like madcap nature, feels a little too madcap, feels a little too outside for him to be the one who's going to take it. So like that's my sort of expectation, is that Bigelow wins.
Which competitor would make the best story if he won?
Tifwood. Well, no, actually I think Brad Lewis would.
Oh, I was going to say Bouskarin for that one. But I'm a classic form versus power, like rooting for the underdog. I love the idea of the little guy who is smarter than the others and has to win through his wits. To me, that's a wonderful story. Always and always what I'm kind of looking for in sports is somebody whose strategy and whose, in his case, it's not so much strategy. I mean, one thing I'll say about this, I don't know if it fits any of our questions, is like this is not the kind of sport that I enjoy paying attention to. I mean, I'm really enjoying this book, but what I'm enjoying is the craft, and I'm enjoying what David Halberstam is pointing at, which I have a question about later. But I think he's making an argument, and I think he's making an argument about attention, I think, very, very subtly. And I'm completely there for that. But, like, I don't really like sports where you have to have a certain body type to compete. I find pro basketball to be very boring. College basketball is a little bit better because you can still be kind of like a 5'10" guard and be kind of like a star. Baseball's pretty good in that regard. Like, you can't be a pitcher. Greg Maddux was 6 feet. There are not a lot of 5'11" and shorter pitchers. Tim Lincecum is 5'11", but he...
Wow, really?
Yeah. Well, and he used to... Part of his stance, remember he had that weird...
Incredibly long arms or something. Yeah.
And he also had a short career because I think he was overstraining his body. His mechanics were ultimately poor. He was kind of stepping too far and probably like putting too much pressure on his tendons and ligaments. The New York Mets starting center fielder is 5'8". And like, I mean, I'm 5'9" and quick. There's nothing about my physical type that would stop me from being a professional shortstop or second baseman. If I put in the, I need to build some strength, but like and I think cycling is kind of that way in the sense that there are different roles for different body types, as I understand it. You can climb.
Soccer as well.
Yeah, and soccer as well. Like, you're probably a fullback. I'm probably like a midfielder or striker, but like we could anchor a team. Like, we both could find a role, like a rec league or something like that. And I was realizing, like, these are the sports that I enjoy playing, are ones in which any body type can compete, and they're also the sports I enjoy paying attention to and watching. And so the way that this sport, especially single scull rowing is described in this book is, to me, it's just like rather boring, because it really just seems to come down to strength and power. Like, it's not even all that strategic in terms of pacing. You can't really draft because any benefit you'd get from the wind is probably diffuse, and you're eating other people's wake, which is going to slow you down. So the strategy is actually like try to get out in front and stay in front. And like, there are some pacing strategies, but I would imagine there's way more strategy in an eight-man boat, 4-man boat, even a dual, a double, because you have to coordinate, and there's stroking strategy and things like that. But like in this, like, it's just like row as hard as you bleeping can, man, you know? And like, they strategize a little bit, but to me it doesn't. And also, like, who's good at it? Big, tall, powerful guys who are basically as tall as you can possibly be and still shove your body into a shell. Yeah, like, exactly. Basically, like if they could somehow make a shell that 6'10" people could fit into, then all the champs would be 6'10". I mean, there are also just not that many people like that because of the distribution curve. So to me, and like, of all of the racers too, Tiff Wood's strategy to me is like the most boring. He's just big and strong and works really hard and endures pain, which it might be admirable, but to me isn't very interesting. Like, Bigelow is interesting in that he's a combination of the mental game, and he's strong, he pays a lot of attention, but he also has a very good stroke as well. Bouskarian is supposed to be the smoothest rower, so he's the most efficient user of his body. But in an ideal sport, in my opinion, Bouskarian would have the advantage over the other two because he's the most skilled. So, not that any of this really matters in terms of it being a great story, but I sort of pointed out only in that I think Halberstam is doing a great job because he's made me completely care about this event that I wouldn't really naturally care about. And even part of the fun of the book is my reflection on how much I probably don't actually like this sport very much.
Yeah. Well, I think I think you've hit on one of the reasons why rowing in that era and still is a small sport, because I think the only people that are attracted to rowing are rowers.
Yeah.
Because the only thing that rowers admire is the internal battle against the self.
Yeah.
And that's what gains respect among rowers. And you're basically setting up a completely hermetic and insular like experience
and
there.
All four of these guys are a little bit crazy, right? You know,
totally.
They're not. There's something wrong with all of them. You know, maybe it's well managed. Maybe you could see rowing as a kind of, you know, medicated outlet for their craziness that's, you know, less harmful than some other outlets. But they all have something to prove. They're all kind of selfish. They're all kind of self-absorbed. They're all kind of ruthless and cutthroat. And the other thing, and I think this is part of the argument of the book, is that like they probably all could be more successful as Olympians if they work together, and they won't.
Yeah.
And even Parker thinks that, the coach, but at the same time, he's part of that culture too. And I think that Halberstam's very gently critiquing that. You know, he points out that the U.S. is different in this regard, that there are other countries where there is maybe even more glory in the quad or the double or the 8, but not in America, baby. Like, you know, you don't want to share that win with 7 other guys or 3 other guys. It's just not the same.
Because you want to be the best.
And I think the best.
You know, the place where I pick up on that the most is the profile of Harry Parker, which I believe comes in chapter 9.
Yeah.
Where you're like, this guy is an asshole.
Totally.
He's like out here playing soccer with his athletes, elbowing them in the chest, like getting a chipped tooth and like keep going. Like
he reminded me a little bit of Mark Albee at that moment. If you ever played basketball with Mark Albee,
100%.
This is a farmer we used to work with who was in probably his late 40s when we were in our 20s as camp counselors, and he'd go out and throw elbows in the Sunday afternoon basketball game. He was good too.
Ripped. Also, there's like
very
apocryphal legends about him bench pressing the front of a tractor off of him, which almost certainly didn't happen. But in the spirit of what we've talked about before, the story is great.
Print the legend.
So I have a question for you because the thing that I was intrigued about the most in reading this, unsurprisingly, is structure. And that's why I put the chapter list in there, not for our recap. But I was wondering, you know, and I think, you know, we could just, you know, tear through this really quickly. You know, and I, you know, I'm sure I've missed some stuff in the shorthanding of this.
Yeah.
But chapter 1 is, you know, as we just said, no one cares about these Olympic trials, and we meet everybody.
Yep.
We shift to Tiff Wood's journey to these trials, plus we get a few touches on the other characters. Chapter 3 zooms out to let us know and show us that rowing is a insular and hermetic world. We get a John Bigelow profile, a Joe Buscarin profile. We get more Tiff Wood, a more fuller profile of him.
Yep.
We see Wood's rise to his place as perhaps the favorite, and then Bigelow's appearance threatening that.
Yep.
Chapter 8, Bigelow is as good as Wood, and a friendship kind of burgeons between them. We get the coach profile in chapter 9, who is sort of organizing at least 3 of these men. Then we drop into some real action. We get the Friday of the trials. We get the prelims, which are, you know, I think chapter 10 is 3 pages long. So it lingers on the prelims as much as it should. Then we shift and we get Brad Lewis's profile before shifting back to the trials all the way through the semifinals. And everybody plus Jim Dietz, who is the previous champion and a former Olympian himself, who's 35 at this point, so probably towards the end. We get the recounting of the semifinals, and we have most of our set crew for the finals. And I was interested, you know, you're a professional journalist. I wanted to like ask you like about this structure. Like, what parts of it are you like, yes, nailed it? Like, I really think that's where you would go with that. And then what parts of it sort of make you think like, what an odd choice?
Yeah, one, I am a professional journalist, but I would not claim to be a master of structure, even though I think about it all the time. And it is absolutely central to what I do. So, but I still feel like I'm learning, and I feel like this is a lesson in structure. And also, the structure, another thing I'll say about it is that I'm not sure an editor would let you get away with it. Like, I don't know that this book would be published today, because it appears to have no action. And so I would describe the structure vaguely as concentric. In the sense that you start with an event, central event. This is the thing we're talking about, and then everything that follows that is an expansion of the context of that event. And although in this case, the way that I map it in my brain is it's kind of like a spiral nebula or spiral galaxy with like 9 spirals, right? So it's like, here's Tiff Wood's spiral. Like, here's who he is going back into the 60s and 70s in the last Olympic. And then here's Bigelow's spiral and how, and so in a way, you know, and he's not signposting the structure at you. He's not telling you this is what we're going to do. It was a little bit surprising at first when I started reading the book, and I'm like, wait, now we're talking about, you could imagine somebody who intersperses the sort of digressions and profiles into a more temporal narrative, right? Like, you could maybe part of the reason he doesn't do it is not much happens at the Olympic trials, but in that case you could do like the 6-month run up to the trials. Like, he has enough information that he could start the book in, like, I don't know, when are the trials, like February or March or something?
Spring, I think March of '84.
So he could start them in, like, you know, October in the cold boathouse in Cambridge, right, on the Charles River. And you maybe like the first time, is it Bigelow has come from Oregon, or I don't, because they kind of, the three of them kind of converge upon that boathouse. So that is how, well, in this case they're training in Harvard.
Training in Cambridge.
They've been training all winter together. The three of them have been training sort of together. I mean, like, not like, and that's where the coach is, Parker, because he's the Harvard coach, which is probably why they're training there. So you could start it there and do the same spirals while continuing this narrative, which would be sort of like, it's kind of like a train that's moving somewhere, and then it stops and everybody gets out and like visits this city and then visits that city, you know, sort of like D&D adventure kind of.
Totally.
But instead, no, it's this nebula, it's this galaxy. And then I think it's going to shift in the second half, I imagine, too. And I think what it gets you, one of the things it gets you that I think he does really masterfully is that you constantly have your expectations changed in reverse. And one of the things he's constantly doing is like, oh, did you think Tiff Wood was going to win? Well, Bigelow's been coming on pretty strong lately. Oh, but you know what? Bouskarin's been coming along pretty strong lately. And you keep getting these little details, because I think Bouskarin even beats Bigelow or Wood in like some of the most recent training races they've done recently. So he's sort of surging in this particular moment. He keeps evening the odds. I even wrote it down at one point. And I think that's the brilliant thing. I think once you get the sense that one of these people is going to win and it feels inevitable, then for this particular narrative, the book becomes a lot less interesting. And he sort of keeps us guessing. You know, I'm thinking about Moneyball, where I believe that at the very beginning of Moneyball, Michael Lewis tells us that the Oakland A's like went from being the worst team in baseball to the best team in baseball. So there's no drama. You know, it's just how did they do it becomes the story. And this is totally different. I mean, there is drama. And I think the other thing that happens is there is a balancing of details so that we get to know these guys' psychology and their attitudes. And at some point, they all kind of come across as assholes, as we've been saying. But then there's often a redeeming anecdote as well. And so there's sort of two like meters he's keeping with each athlete. And it's sort of like favorite, and he'll kind of get them up a little bit and then sort of drop them back down, or he'll raise the other one up a little bit to bring the others back down. And he's keeping, and then same thing with their sympathy, like whether you like them or not. And I think that the structure sort of contributes to that. And I don't mind that it's sprawling and lacking in action. Although that is, I think, a critique a modern editor might have. But what you know, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, like, I don't think Halberstam was a rower. I don't, like I don't remember ever hearing anything about that. And when I came across this book for the first time, I was like, that's weird.
But I think
like,
he is of their social class, right?
Absolutely.
Like he strikes
he
me.
moved
He's
in these circles.
He's a Ivy Leaguer, right? And and social class is incredibly important to this book, I think.
Totally. And that's why Lewis is sort of the outsider, the dark horse.
Yep.
And I kind of imagine, like, David Halberstam, I would love to know the story of how this came to be.
Yeah.
But I kind of imagine him hearing about it and being like, tell me more about that. And then as he slowly realizes the structure that is already there, him being like, oh my gosh, like this could be a very, very good story. And all the things that you're talking about sort of coming clear to him, like, oh my gosh, like there was this kind of buildup of like you didn't know who was going to win or who was going to come out on top. And, and then because he is so good, he is just he can do big and he can do little, is one of the great things about him. And I just imagine him as like sort of a giddy sports writer being like, it's already done. I just have to go talk to everybody and like do the support and then organize the pieces where they go.
Yeah.
And to me, I mean, this book is like such a I love that spiral galaxy idea, because like everybody is connected and maybe like Harry Parker is the sort of like dense center of most of it. Or maybe the dense most of it is sort of like this social class that is usually very successful, but for some reason also spawns these obsessive, egotistic, to some degree, maybe a little messed up kind of athletes who nobody knows about.
Yeah.
And I can really see him sort of like being, sort of assembling the pieces on the floor of the apartment.
There are stories as a journalist that I am sort of always reporting without knowing it. Mm-hmm. And I feel, so an example of this is my friend John Facile visited me in LA recently, and I took him around and stuff, and I was just, when you visited me in LA, I'm often like, and then, this is this place where this thing happened. And over there is like the house from The Long Goodbye.
Jackie Brown.
And there's the house from Jackie Brown. And so I was doing that normal thing. And I was telling him about this surfer named Randy Wright. I don't know if I've talked to you about Randy, who basically lives in his truck at the Sunset Point surf spot.
Oh, he's the one with the fire. Yeah.
And he survived the fire. He has a kayak. He is a photographer. He's kind of like retired basically, and he's everybody knows him, and he's always there. And I got to know him recently, and I was just describing this, and I was like, yeah, and he kind of like survived the fires in his truck. And it later turned out he was fighting the fires, which was even better. But I was telling all this to John. John works for the show Snap Judgment, and John was like, you got a story here. And I was like, well, I don't have any time to pitch it. So John ended up pitching it to Snap Judgment, and I ended up doing what's called a tape sync, where I hold the interview, and hopefully it'll be out on the radio soon. But I think there are a number of stories like that where, like, Halberstam went to Harvard. He probably knew about Parker. Like, he probably knew about the racing culture and the fanaticism associated with it. And maybe he was paying attention, to crew anyway, in the same way that, like, I know some pretty interesting stories about things that I was exposed to. I don't even, like, my mom worked for the Keeneland horse race track, and there's stuff out there about horse racing that I know would make a fascinating story if I ever get the time and could find an editor. Or there's stories about like athletes at UVA when I was there who, like, I was reading about Anthony Poindexter, who was this incredibly talented defensive back who got injured, and just sort of like, I was kind of reading about him, and I was like, oh, this is a really fascinating story. And I actually believe he's now a football coach, sort of landed on his feet. Or Rondé and Tiki Barber, and Tiki, who made the decision to leave football after 9 years because he was a running back and basically like he pivoted into being a broadcaster basically so that he could grow up to be an old man and walk, because his body was being destroyed over and over again. Anyway, I'm just like free associating right here, but these are not things that I have like actively sought out to report. I did a story about the relationship between Steve Goodman and the song that he wrote, Go Cubs Go, and the renewed popularity of that song, when the Cubs won the 2016 World Series, and how that song had been largely forgotten and then like taken out of the archives. And I barely had to report it, like I just knew, I kind of just knew it because it's the sort of thing I pay attention to. And I imagine that's what it's like with this book in Halberstam. I imagine he's kind of, maybe he would go and maybe he lived in Princeton, or maybe I don't know where he lived at this time. But I just imagine that he had a foot in it already, even if he wasn't a racer, a rower.
Yeah, it feels like a passion project. It feels like the kind of book that you kind of write in the background while you're doing all your other work. Yeah. And it sort of slowly takes shape and you kind of can't stop thinking about it. And, it's like he's always got an oar in the water with the book. And it really has that feel of something personal and I don't know if he loves rowing or not, but there's something about it that really seems to speak to him. And because I don't think you would get a portrait of this insular world done so well from somebody that, didn't care about it or find it really compelling.
Well, that sets up.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, if you make your last point, but you just did set up the reading that I have prepared.
I think the structure is masterful. Like, I love that Brad Lewis appears in chapter 11. Like, I think that's a really nice addition. And like, it's sort of, the, like the save the cat kind of idea. Like, you're kind of like halfway through and your initial argument might be like losing steam a little bit and like, oh, we need a little injection of something. Yeah,
it's like kick the table over,
Yeah, totally.
And it totally does that. And it's shocking. But it also works because we've been so much in this insular world of Bouskarin and Bigelow and Wood that we experience it the way those guys do, which is who the F is this guy? California, and I actually figured out where he rows in California in Newport Bay, which is it's not very well explained in the book, but he rows around the marina. There's an artificial island in Newport Bay.
Lido Island? Okay.
Yeah. And so when he's talking about doing 2 Lidos, he's talking about essentially rowing around artificial marina. Because I was like, where would you? It's not really a very big bay, but it's in a artificial harbor created by a breakwater, possibly the same breakwater that forms the wedge on the other side of it, which is the famous freakish wave. My reading is from chapter 3, and it's an anecdote about Princeton, which is, where this is set. And we learn that Woodrow Wilson, who was president of Princeton before he became president of the United States, was hitting Andrew Carnegie up for a donation, essentially to endow a law school. Carnegie visited Princeton and told Wilson what his young men needed was not a law school, but a lake to row on. In addition to being a sport that built character and would let the undergraduates relax after all that studying, rowing would keep them from playing football, a roughneck sport. Football, a roughneck sport Carnegie absolutely detested. With that, Carnegie gave $150,000 to dam a nearby stream, and Lake Carnegie was born, financed and named. Princeton never came up with a law school. Later, Wilson told Carnegie, we asked for bread, and you gave us cake. And football remained a more popular sport on campus than crew. But who was to say, some 80 years later, in an America that was an increasingly litigious society, that Andrew Carnegie had made the wrong choice? Follow-up question. Based on the first chapter, the first page that you read to us from the first chapter, there's also some details in the early chapters about like how the TV industry is paying attention to certain big-time Olympic sports like hockey and track and field and not crew and rowing. This was a moment where I started detecting a tone, and I'm curious if you detect a tone here and how you would name it, and I'll share my thoughts once you have a chance to share yours.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's so many little suggestions about the corrupting influence of money in this book. I mean, it's called The Amateurs.
Yeah,
and I mean, it is appearing at a time in sport history when this question of amateurship in the Olympics becomes the animating feature of Olympic sport. Like, do we expect these people to be purists that do not do this for the money and simply do it for the Olympic ideal, which I have, reservations about that idea in the first place. And, to bring up, but then the other interesting thing is, Woodrow Wilson is hitting up Andrew Carnegie. He's like one of the richest men in the world. And so there is sort of a little bit of that tone of voice that it's super subtle, because I think that Halberstam is making a point that there is something impressive about the drive of these men, but there's also something worrisome about it. And I think that we can get it just in that little anecdote, because like Carnegie's impulses are about, like, crew is like a finer sport than football. And it's like, get the fuck out of here, man. Like, whatever. Like, it's, sport is sport, and who are you to editorialize about the relative merits of different sports? Like, there is beauty in all sport, because it's incredibly interesting, and we don't know who's going to win. I do think that maybe it's 60-40 a little bit in the like direction of like the corrupting influence of money is difficult. And I think even that Andrew Carnegie anecdote is one of it, because like he gives a lot of money to basically get his way, which is that he wants the sport to kind of remain pure and free of money. And it's sort of one of those ways that like the rich can very often exercise their influence in conservative ways, which is essentially, I want to keep it the way that it was.
Yeah.
And so I think Halberstam is, I think he understands and sees the tension that like money is a corrupting influence, but it would be great if these guys could feed themselves. Like, they are admirable athletes who work very, very hard for this thing that they are obsessed with. And the world is headed in a direction where the big sports are going to be king, where baseball and football and basketball are going to lord it over the amateurs. And so it is a nuanced tone. It's like money can be a problem, but I doubt if we could exhume David Halberstam and ask him a question, if we could cast Speak with Dead on David Halberstam's body, I don't think he would be like, sport should be pure.
Yeah, I mean, the way I wouldn't have used the word money, although I certainly see why you would say that, because I think that's the engine. I hear him saying that our attention economy is off kilter.
Yeah.
That we're paying attention to the wrong things. And probably money has a lot to do with that. But it's also a cultural sort of fixation with kind of flash bang, right? With things, the hockey wasn't very interesting to most Americans until we beat the Soviets. So it's part of that. It's part of this like national pride and nationalism and sort of Reaganism. You think you're right that the TV companies are sort of anointing. This is an era where they're kind of figuring out which sports to anoint. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
And then there's another passage just like a page or two later where he describes all these like crew rowers and former crew rowers as like veterans who returned from a small distant war, able only to talk to other veterans. And I'm going to read this section too. I just love this so much. Nice. Failing to get their deeds and names known to the world of outsiders, they had become the custodians of their own honor, their own record book keepers. They remembered with astonishing fidelity each race, who had beaten whom and by how many seconds, who had rowed at what beat, who had rowed through whom, for that was the phrase that oarsmen used, rowing through someone else, one man finding extra strength as another tired. If they lost a particular race, they remembered each mitigating factor, heavier wind in their lane than the winners, a poor rigging in the boat, a particularly bad airplane trip that had cost them 2 days of rest. Because their sport was largely ignored by the traditional media, it was also to a remarkable degree a sport enshrined in myth rather than reality. Because their deeds were passed on by word of mouth rather than by book and newspaper, the sport gained a mythic aura. And I think he's both saying, I think this is admiration. Yeah. Even though he's describing, at least, sort of dispassionately, and maybe he's not being judgmental about it, but he's describing 4 people who are obsessed and kind of irrationally obsessed. And I would sort of like, I think all 4 of these guys could use some therapy, because, and actually I'll ask you one more question about that as a coach. But still, there is still something admirable about the whole thing. And I think it's that same kind of the same contradiction that really was at the heart of the writer. And maybe that's why you like both of these books so much, which is that sports is kind of more beautiful when people really, really care about them. Sports are more beautiful when people really care passionately about them. But then the kind of people who care passionately enough to win are often a bit off their rocker in a way. And one wonders, do they even enjoy it? I mean, like, do you think that these guys' lives are enriched by their race to be the single scull rower on the Olympic team?
Yes and no. I mean, like, to what degree self-knowledge can be enriching, but it's not the kind of self-knowledge that, like, fuels a larger, stable, generous life. Yeah. It's the kind of self-knowledge that, like, only is reflective of yourself and, like, what you can do on a daily basis and what that means in your own personal mythology. And it's what's interesting about endurance athletes, I think, is their willingness to go somewhere that most people are not willing to go for the slightest of rewards. Yeah. And it's a very odd thing. But yeah, I mean, like, most endurance, the cliche is that we are all running from something as endurance athletes, and most of us could really use some therapy and would be better for it. And what I love about that passage is I can really hear David Halberstam's worry about television. Yeah. As this thing, this monolithic thing that focuses on one thing only, and especially in the era of network television and 4 channels, and it creates a monoculture. Yeah. And you've talked earlier in this, like, this would not work today because the culture is so fragmented, or maybe it would work because, like, 10 obsessed people would go and YouTube it. Yeah. And and so maybe there would be a smaller but more intense kind of audience for it. But what he's describing is this sort of monastic, poetic, kind of like Homeric thing that's going on, that you get the sense that David Halberstam might admire more than the sports that are becoming co-opted by television. But the thing is like, I'm very happy for the athletes that are in sports that are co-opted by television to make a goddamn living. Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think the book doesn't necessarily answer the question of where should this. I do think he's saying that our attention is off and that these people deserve more attention. Although I also think he's saying that their attention
is off too. And that, maybe they should be paying more attention to stroke, or maybe they should be paying more attention to working out. That there is this kind, and I think that Parker in a way is almost kind of a villain in the sense, because he is kind of the avatar or the totem of Tiff Wood's, just sort of like, one has the sense that if Tiff Wood spent a year just working on technique and not worrying about power, that he would emerge from that year as like the greatest rower ever. But Parker's not going to do that with him, because they're sort of impatient, whatever. He's competing at the high level. At one point they say he's so good that he can get away with inefficiencies and get away with making mistakes. And like nobody is motivated to fix that. And my feeling is that if Parker were a greater coach, he probably would be able to coach these guys into a quad or two doubles, where they would probably be more likely to actually compete in the Olympics and win something, and they'd actually be more likely to achieve something that's greater than themselves and greater than the sum of themselves, which to me is more valuable than these guys are rating it. I see them as kind of like stuck in this trap of individual glory, and that's why they're single sculling. And I think he's both admirable of the culture in the sense that this part of it, the kind of oral tradition, the way that they remember it, the way that they know each other, the way that great races live on for decades or 2 decades, that people still talk about the rude and the smooth Harvard crew, like all of these things. There's something really enriching about that. There's something that really dings the bell that Tim Grabby is dinging when he says, what is it? The emptiness of their lives astonish me. Like in the first couple of, in the first paragraph of the writer, there's something of that here too that I think he admires. But I think he's also pointing out that the rowing culture is a little bit off as well.
And the American rowing culture,
particularly
off. We learn early that the Europeans, who are well-funded and team-oriented, and they work together and have like very, deliberate programs, are just wildly successful.
Yeah.
And you spend a lot of this book wondering, is the Olympic trials the best that these guys can hope for?
Yeah.
Is this simply a chance to be like marched off to slaughter by the East Germans?
Well, and the other thing is that this is a sport that really only rich kids can do. Because essentially, you need a $4,000 boat, and you need to be able to like get supported by your parents, or live with your parents,
or go to the schools, or
go to the
have
schools.
These programs, which almost all of them are very expensive. Like you would have to go to a prep school to row there, and then you would have to go to, one of the 20 like rowing institutions, 8 of which are the Ivy League.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because it's also like these are for rich kids who are, or maybe not. I mean, rich might be too strong of a word, but certainly upper middle class, right? And they're headed for medical school. Like I believe that Joe Bigelow became a anesthesiologist. And I think Buscarin was in medical school too. They know that they're not going to make a living rowing, and at some point they're going to have to transition, probably in their 30s into some kind of career, and probably that career is going to be pretty lucrative. But at the same time, they're choosing to sort of live in poverty and drive beat up cars and sleep on each other's couches and probably have roommates and things like that, even though they're choosing poverty for the sake of the sport. And there is something that is at once admirable and also messed up about that. Why should they have to make the choice? In fact, we can look at Europe and be like, oh no, our best athletes, they row in quads and we give them a stipend. And that's probably better, right?
Yeah.
Although there is something
totally.
At the same time though, there is something very compelling about a guy who, works 4 months a year framing houses and then drives a beat up Volvo wagon or Saab, putting his skull there and like driving down to Princeton and crashing on his friend's couch to like go see if he can go to the Olympics. There's also something deeply compelling about that too. And I think Halberstam's good at inspiring that ambivalence in the reader.
Yes, that's exactly what I was about to say. Is that like he's so good at drawing this problem with American identity, while at the same time describing the glory of it. And, and like he's managing to critique our rugged individual like ideal, which is very critique worthy. And at the same time, making clear the noble aspects of it that can get co-opted and ruined. And I think that's one of the things that I find so amazing about this book.
Shall we go to trivia?
Well, let's go to trivia. I believe I am the host. I have a pretty basic one, but the 1988 trials for the Seoul Olympics saw which character from this book claim a spot on the 1988 Olympic team? Was it Wood, Euskarin, Bigelow, Lewis, or Beowulf Schaefer? I'm waiting for Schaefer to make appearance in the second half of the book.
I feel like the most likely is Bigelow because he's young enough. I don't remember how old Brad Lewis was.
He's 29 at the time of the trials.
Okay.
He's older, but he's not as old as Wood.
Yeah. Wood is unlikely because Wood would be 36 at that point where he's probably falling off a little bit athletically. And also, even if he's not, I mean, I was in best shape of my life at 36. It's hard to just maintain the lifestyle,
Totally.
Training lifestyle and all of that and keep your body together and that sort of thing. Lewis is the other dark horse there. You know what? I'm going to guess Lewis.
Oh, it's Bigelow. Way to go.
Outsmarted myself.
He did.
Classic.
Yeah,
he sort of bagged it.
He came in third in the 88 trials and got there. It was something, maybe a different format or whatnot, but he does get to the Olympics in 88. What do you got?
So first of all, one of the things I was wondering about as I was reading this book, and there was no digression about it, is how do rowers and scullers avoid accidents when they're training because they can't see where they're going? And they're on a busy river system or something like that. So how do they avoid it? And apparently, with great difficulty is the answer. There are accidents. There's also some lane marking that happens. And I think the people who are rowing in the Charles River become very adept at knowing every twist and turn. They know what's coming up. Sometimes they have to turn and look. And I think there's probably sections of the river that are more suitable for pieces. So there's a bunch of different ways maintaining lane discipline, but sometimes the system breaks down. So according to the Charles River Alliance of Boaters, CRAB, wonderful acronym, which phrase is recommended to yell if you are a boater and you judge or reckon that a shell is on a collision course with your vessel?
Marvelous.
Is it A, rower look ahead, B, sailboat? And by the way, I'm giving you too many options in this case, so there'll be some kind of mitigation of that somehow. Okay. A, rower look ahead, B, sailboat up or powerboat up or kayak up, basically class of boat up.
Got
is
it.
2. 3, or C, ahoy the shell. Ahoy, comma, the shell.
Yeah.
D, heads up, chout ahead. And E, all of the above are recommended in the Charles River Alliance of Boaters guide to the Charles River.
Oh no, what a curveball. I don't think what's up, chout ahead is gonna, oh God. This is the problem with northeastern, hermetic institutions, is that you think that they are too serious for stuff like this, but then you realize that it's all fantasy anyway, and they're all just hey chum, behind. It's so what's up, chout ahead could be it. Ahoy the shell, class of boat up, rower look ahead.
Those are the three.
All of the above.
It is not all of the above, but because I gave you 5 options, I'm going to give you a second guess. because it was unfair.
That's...
But I was only going to give you a second guess if you chose all of the above, because I just was like, that's unfair bait.
Okay. Sort of going back and forth between rower look ahead and ahoy the shell. Ahoy the shell.
It is rower look ahead.
Ahoy the shell, I picked it because it had some of that, like, New England, Brahmin-y, sort of thing.
It would work. Well, and the other thing they say in that section is, like, don't stand on ceremony. Like, if you need to yell something. They recommend rower look ahead, but any of these, including heads up chowder ahead, would be acceptable. It did the
Officer, I could, I imagine the scene where this guy is trying to explain.
I yelled, look ahead, chowder ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Or that I said, row. I kept saying, rower, look ahead.
That skis didn't look ahead. Jeesh. What a sketch ball. I will say that the crab rowing advisory is a wonderful document, that is worth reading. We'll post it in our show notes.
Perfect.
I'm going to read you, and it is the sort of thing that might jokingly suggest, look up chowder head. Like, that is a plausible thing that you might find in this document, but it's not actually in there. This is from the introduction. I love this. You may not be aware that the Charles is one of the busiest and most competitive rowing venues in the world. It is routine to see more than 4,000 rowers launch in a single day from boathouses from Boston to Newton. Rowing programs are based at not-for-profit, public and private clubs, or school-based facilities. Many boathouses host more than one organization, so it is not uncommon to see novice rowers launching alongside Olympic hopefuls. In fact, it is one of the many things that makes rowing special. You may play basketball all your life, but you will likely never play against Paul Pierce. But if you row, you will likely get to race against or be coached by a current, future, or former world-class rower.
I love Paul Pierce in there.
Yeah, well, it's Boston.
I know. It's great. And it's interesting that that's the Celtic they pick. I mean, yes, a legend, but there are other legends.
Right, Bill Walton, right?
Larry Bird,
Larry Bird,
McHale, Robert Parrish.
I had to look up who Paul Pierce was.
He was great. Yeah.
Sure, I'm sure. A great power forward, 19-year career. Some of the other headlines, it's written as a fact, and some of the headlines are, I can never predict where those wacky rowers are going next. What are they doing? What are the not straight races? I had the right of way and they did not yield. What is up with that?
Well, next up, everybody, we are reading the second half of David Halberstam's The Amateurs.
I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks for listening, everybody. Upper Middlebrow is a small point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are constantly debating whether power or style makes a podcast go. I think it's style. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by Chris Bagg. We are supported by Jenny Grieve and Justin Reich. Jenny Grieve had her one-on-one last week.
Amazing.
Find us on Patreon, where there are a number of tiers at which you could show your support.
I love it because I think power makes a podcast go.
Of course you do.
Of course I do. But as a reminder, everybody, Jesse and I are both writers and editors, as Jenny Grieve found out, and can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. Thanks for listening, everybody.
And check out the Homework Machine.
Please do.
Which is the thing I've been working on for the last year, and Chris Bagg has also been working on.
It is marvelous.
We got 2 more stations today.
No way.